and thanks for joining us on this special edition of the Newsfeed. I'm your host, Rachel Franks. Today we'll be discussing the issue of whether or not student athletes should be paid with the help of our two guests, Devin Wilson and Andrew Allegretta. We will further explore the pros and cons of this issue. Devin, who plays on the men's basketball team, believes that student athletes should be paid, while Andrew believes that they should not. To begin, we would first like to get to know our guests a little bit better. If each of you guys could tell us a little bit about your background in college sports, that'd be great. Andrew, let's start with you.
I'm a radio broadcaster and TV broadcaster for college sports. Right now I work at Virginia Tech as the women's basketball and baseball broadcaster. In the past, I've worked at a university called Charleston Southern as a football and men's basketball broadcaster. So I'm a broadcaster in college sports.
Well, thanks for joining us, Andrew. Devin?
I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a sophomore point guard for the basketball team, and that's about it.
Okay. So the idea of paying student athletes has always been a hot issue, especially at a sports center school like Virginia Tech. Similarly, at the University of Texas, athletic director Steve Patterson recently reported that the school will begin paying all of their athletes, male and female. The cost will reach $6 million annually and about $10,000 per student athlete. According to the Dallas Daily News, the money will cover expenses that are not normally covered by scholarships, in addition to $5,000. So the university will have the rights to the student's image. So our first question for you guys is about the cost aspect. Where is all this money going to come from?
I suppose I'll start, and first things first. No shock that our point guard is the one in favor of paying college athletes. And the thing is, I'm not sure that they should be paid necessarily, so where is this money going to come from becomes a huge issue if it comes from anywhere at all. What Texas is doing is something called full cost of attendance, and that's a little bit different than straight up paying athletes like a stipend or paying for their autographs or all these other things. Paying for full cost of attendance is something that is worthwhile to delve into because there's more than just tuition and room and board that goes into being a student athlete. There's travel, can they get home on time, there's meal money, there's that kind of expenses. Those expenses, if it goes down that road, probably should come from the athletic department, but if you're walking down the autograph side of things, if you're walking down the stipend side of things, that becomes an issue because not all athletic departments are created equal. And if athletic departments are going to have to pay for this stuff, all of a sudden Virginia Tech can out-recruit somebody like Radford or Charleston Southern or VMI, and the gap that's already in college athletics becomes a way bigger issue. So if it's just straight up the responsibility of the athletic departments to pay for this, you're going to have a huge problem with competitive balance.
And Devin?
I believe just you can bring the money from, say, head coaches who are making millions and millions of dollars. They can easily take in maybe $5 million, $4 million pay cut just to be able to pay student athletes. It can come from donors, boosters, since they're already supplying the scholarships in general. What's enough to throw a little bit more money in there just for the sake of what the student athletes are doing on a daily basis and their schedules that they have.
Talking about their schedule, something that's frequently used in college sports is amateur athletics. With all the pressure being put on athletes, the TV deals, and all the money that's being made off of them, do you think that that phrase can still be applied to what's happening today?
I'll take it. I don't think it can be applied at all. We're not amateurs. The things we do aren't amateur. We are treated a lot like pro athletes nowadays with the interviews we have to do, charity work we voluntarily do, the work hours we put into our craft, which is the game of basketball. So I don't think you can treat us like amateurs or you can give us the amateur title because it just doesn't apply with how much we do on the court and off the court and how much we are compared to pros.
Yeah.
What about high school students, Devin?
High school students, I think, is a pretty big difference. You have high school students where they're not really into the game. They don't have to do the interviews. They don't have to do the voluntary work outside of the gym. They aren't getting scholarships in general. They're still living at home with their parents, so I think that's also a big factor.
I'm just saying, high school sports are on ESPN. ESPN will carry Under Armour All-American games. They will interview these players. The high school players, I'm sure, have a lot of pressure from their coaches. I'm sure you did when you were in high school to get in the gym at this time, being told to be at this time. So I guess the point that I'm making is if we say college athletics is no longer amateur, then there's going to be some of this issue that applies to high school sports as well because they're asked to do interviews. They're asked to be on ESPN. ESPNU covers these games. I've got a good friend that his job is basically to follow around all the big AAU basketball games guys that are going to end up at Kentucky or Duke or North Carolina or here at Virginia Tech. So those guys have demands on them as well. So the argument basically against amateurism and paying people always comes down, excuse me, to the slippery slope aspect. So if we just open it up and say college athletics is no longer amateur, then high school sports is something that you'll have to visit. The demand may not be as great and the money may not be as great, but they still have demand, and ESPN is still broadcasting high school games. So that's the only thing you have to consider.
Now, I'm wondering, when considering high school sports, can they be paid? Like, if someone wants to start paying high school students, could they be paid?
I mean, you can always write the rules to do what you want to be able to do. So you could write the rules so that high school students could get paid for their sports and still get a college scholarship offer. I don't know that they should because, again, of the same slippery slope, because then all of a sudden somebody that's getting recruited in middle school is getting media attention, and somebody wants this 8th graders, or when LeBron James was really, really good, wanted LeBron James's autograph when he was in 7th or 8th grade. Should LeBron James be able to get paid for that autograph? And all of a sudden he can't even consider going to high school, or he can't even consider going to Ohio State. Not that he did, but I'm just throwing it out there. It's always the slippery slope aspect of how far is far enough, how far is too far.
Okay, well, thank you for giving us that opinion. So let's pause and take a short break before resuming our discussion. Stay with us here on the newsfeed.
Oh, you got it. You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. God, no.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early. You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Welcome back to this special edition of the newsfeed. I'm Rachel Franks. Today we are addressing the issue of whether or not student athletes should be paid, with our guests Devin Wilson and Andrew Allegretta. Let's continue with our discussion. So many would argue that students are paid through their education, through scholarships. Do you agree or disagree with this? Devin, you can start us off.
I would actually agree with that. I think education is a very big, important deal with how student athletes are being with their scholarship, but I also think that it's not enough. Just because you get an education doesn't mean it subsides all the work that you're putting into your sport, which is almost 40 hours a week, and having to do all the extra stuff that we do off the court as well. So I would say education, you are being paid with that, but it's not enough.
Part of me wants to say that it is enough simply because student athletes are getting something that a lot of the regular student body doesn't get. There's plenty of young men and young women that have to go to universities and have to go to colleges and pay for the full amount of tuition, or even if it's not the full amount of tuition, they're still paying a huge chunk, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for tuition. That's something that student athletes don't have to bear the brunt of. And then you guys, not you guys, but student athletes in general, also get room and board to go along with that as well, where that's another cost that regular student athletes, regular students at universities don't have to incur. So while there's a lot of money that goes out there, it is something that you have to remember. You can't totally dismiss the tuition, the gear that student athletes get, the travel that student athletes get. Devin here and myself here have been on charter flights, which is wild to me, and I'm sure it's wild to Devin to a certain extent that we have the luxury of being able to get on a flight to go play Florida State or go play Miami and be back in Blacksburg that same evening. So there's a lot of luxuries that student athletes do receive because of the sports that they play, and they should receive those. But to push it beyond some of these things, you have to be careful with, because regular students don't get these things.
So
What
would you say about the disadvantages that we have? Like you said, we have times where we have to fly all the way to Florida State or fly to Miami, and we lose a lot of time.
Sure.
We don't have time like, as you would say, regular students have to do, where they can study for 4 hours on hand when we are on a plane and have to study basketball film or the other team. So what would you say to the disadvantages?
Well, one of the things that actually I think beyond this whole kind of topic is student athletes, depending on who they are and what their interests are, should be allowed to, there should be course requirements and course structures that are better suited to student athletes. I don't think universities do a very good job of structuring course requirements for student athletes, giving them courses and things that matter to student athletes, maybe that don't matter to the regular student. You could do things to change the course requirements and how student athletes go about their majors, their requirements. It's not to minimize the education that student athletes are getting now, but you could better structure courses and curriculums that fit what student athletes are actually involved in and actually what they're trying to do. I think that would be my counter to that.
Okay, so as you mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different issues when it comes to paying and what sports should be paid and what sports shouldn't be paid. What athletes should be paid? Should certain athletes be paid more or less? What do you think? How do you think you balance that out if we do start paying student athletes?
I think that's probably the hardest balance of all of it, to be totally honest with you, because Devin, to be honest, you deserve more than someone on the swimming and diving team deserves. But you don't deserve as much as, say, Michael Brewer does or Logan Thomas did over the past couple of years, simply based on the way that money is paid out by whether it's television contracts or donors or ticket sales or whatever it is, merchandise sales. So it's really, really hard. If you're going to open it up to a true capitalism type option for this, everybody gets paid what they're worth, but then that's a huge issue where you're going to have multi-million-dollar student athletes walking around and then a swimming and diving athlete that, to be honest, probably doesn't necessarily even deserve the tuition based on the money that they're bringing in. So if you preserve the student athletes like swimming and lacrosse and their tuitions, you're going to have a hard time seeing these other high-end student athletes kind of take off with their finances as well. So that's the balance between the whole thing, and that might be the hardest balance of it all. I mean, I don't know how much you think you deserve versus a swimmer or something like that.
I would agree with what you say on that, but I think that's where you have to put out a difference. You have to maybe make a baseline for it. So like say like sports, you don't bring in as much money as say football or basketball. Some schools say like a lacrosse, like a swimming and diving, you have to put a baseline of how much those athletes in that sport actually make. So it might be a difference and there might be some arguments on what there could be, but that's kind of what you have to do. So say if you play football, you make a little bit more money than someone who plays basketball if you're a football school technically or a basketball school. Mm-hmm. So if you set that baseline, I think it will make all student athletes happy because they're actually getting paid still, but it also lets them know that, hey, my sport's not as important or doesn't make as much money as the other one, so therefore I understand why I'm not making as much money.
Can I ask Devin a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Would you be willing to give up charter flights to get paid? Would you be willing to give up some of the gear that you receive to get paid? That's a very real possibility, right? Because these athletic departments, I realize there's millions of dollars that come in from television contracts, but the athletic department is still paying not just coaches and administrators, but the athletic department is paying the people that work concessions at baseball games and football games, and they're paying security for these kind of things, and those costs will add up to the point where adding an extra $1 million or $2 million to pay student athletes becomes all of a sudden a burden. So you might have to give up some of those things. Are you willing to lose some of the Nike gear, some of the travel luxury, some of those things that make life as a student athlete a little bit easier?
I would say yes. There's a point where you can give up, say you can give up the gear aspect of it or the charter flights, but I also think that's where a lot of the bigger sporting companies like Nike, where they endorse your basketball team, where they can endorse an individual, like they do like a LeBron, like a Kevin Durant, to where you get gear anyway for getting paid. So I think if you get paid, the endorsements would come as if you're like a pro.
Okay.
Well, that was both interesting points from both of you guys bring up. But that's all the time we have today. We are going to have to put a hold on this discussion. Thank you for our guests, Andrew and Devin, for coming in and joining us today. Remember that you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, as well as our website, the newsfeed, nrv.wordpress.com. I'm Rachel Franks. Thanks for joining us.